We're live.
All right.
My longtime friend, John Anzalone, is joining us. This is episode 3 of Out of the Wilderness, which is my attempt to understand where Democrats have been, where they are, and where they're going. John, look, I'm thrilled that John is someone of John's level is willing to do this. John has been at the extreme highest level of Democratic polling and consultancy for a long time. He was Joe Biden's pollster in 2020. The time that Joe Biden won the election. So I'll note that. John, basically, I want to start, and people will be coming in here, and thank you all for joining us. We're going to go no more, just so everyone knows, no more than about 40 minutes. If you have a question for John or me, put it in there. I'll grab it. But, Enzo, I want to start. We're now, look, everybody and their brother has offered a diagnosis of what went wrong. It was Biden is too old, the debate, Harris wasn't a good candidate, Trump's a better candidate than people think. Simon Rosenberg, the last time I did this, blamed Future Forward, the super PAC, for bad messaging.
That's silly.
So tell me, give me your, as someone who I know has looked at this stuff and I know is thoughtful and smart about it. When you look at 2024, number one, did you think you were going to win? I assume you did, but number one, do you think you were going to win? And number two, why didn't Democrats win?
So, these things never have a simple answer. So I'll give you a simple answer. And then I want to peel back the onion and kind of talk about how I think you have to look at this.
Okay.
At the end of the day, I think the simple answer is that Trump and his campaign and his independent expenditures made Kamala Harris unacceptable, right? And it wasn't actually that difficult. The interesting thing is that, if you kind of look at Kamala Harris at the end of July, all of August and probably through Labor Day, she had a really good run,
Good.
And you and I are married. It's like, you've had in the dating scenes, I had months and months of really good times, and then it all fell apart
Totally.
with a girlfriend, and it's happened plenty with everyone who's probably on here right now, whether you're male or female or whatever. But they made her unacceptable, and I think that when I look at this, and I wasn't involved in 2024, my partner, my really super talented partner, Molly Murphy, she was part of that team. I was actually doing a fellowship up at the JFK School all fall semester, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But what I got to watch and what I got to kind of experience with my students, because I was doing a study group kind of on the 2024 elections, and I was showing TV commercials, right? And in terms of making her acceptable, what everyone always talks about is the transgender ad, which was brutal, right?
Against the she's for they, them, Donald Trump's for us.
But what I think that people forget is that they made her unacceptable at the number one issue, which was economics and inflation, at the macro and micro level, and they made her unacceptable and way out of the mainstream on the social issues like transgender rights, et cetera. But what I think a lot of times they forget is that, I think one of the most brutal ads that they ran was when she, what really hurt or killed her or made her unacceptable were her own words. And so the TV ad I'm thinking about, for example, is when she's talking about, the acknowledgement that people are going through tough pain and inflation, et cetera. And then the Republicans, they cut to her again saying, Bidenomics, it's really working, right? So at the macro level, she was sucked into having to own Bidenomics. 56% of Americans felt they were worse off because of the Biden administration policies. So that's number one. What most people probably didn't see, including on this, unless you were in a battleground state, is they made her unacceptable on the microeconomic issues. I'm from Michigan. I do Gretchen Whitmer. We do a lot of stuff in Michigan. They were running an ad, against EVs and against the Green New Deal, and saying that she wanted to end carbon or combustion engines and gas running engines, et cetera. They never responded. In Pennsylvania, it was her own words, again, video of her, that she wanted to ban fracking. Never responded. And so she was getting killed on the macro and the micro economics, and then she was really getting killed on things like the he, her, them, they,
Yeah.
which I think was devastating to her. And people, I don't think, realize how bad it was, for example, within the African American community,
Yes.
who tend to be a little bit more conservative
Yep.
on social issues, including
Yep.
abortion. There hasn't been a post election interview or focus group that I've watched, and I've watched dozens and dozens and dozens, where people don't, a lot of African Americans mention the transgender issue. But the one other thing that I'll point out, where again, her own words killed her, is how many people, real people, Biden Trump voters, swing voters, mention The View. And I think that people, yeah, you're right.
So this is the View, meaning when she is asked, "What would you have done differently if you were
Right.
president?" and she says, "I can't think of something." Right.
Right. And I think that again, even the analysis of that is a little off.
Okay.
It's not that, oh, she couldn't separate herself from Biden. I think it was a bigger leadership issue. Like, she couldn't, again, almost in a presidential way. I mean, people forget that the reason, and I believe, that Donald Trump lost in 2020 was he wasn't presidential. He couldn't rise to the occasion of dealing with a crisis,
Yes.
come up with a plan,
Yep.
and execute it. And I think that people looked at that View thing where it's like, you know what? If she can't answer that simple question, I'm not sure she's really ready to be president. It reminded me, and you're a little younger, I think, than I am, of when Ted Kennedy could not answer
Why are you
in
running?
1980 why he was.
Yes. Yes.
It literally killed him
Yes.
immediately. He was
Yep.
trying to primary Jimmy Carter. So I just think that they made her unacceptable. And again, I really think that she ran a hell of a good. I mean, she met the moment in July, August, and September. And then again, the negative campaign, I think that they just won that. I mean, the Republicans just won it, and they made her unacceptable. Again, great first date all the way to the
Yes.
20th date. And then she kind of became that San Francisco liberal. And that's not me being critical of her. That was just, it was what it was. I feel bad in some ways because, Kamala Harris was an accidental nominee. Like, she didn't have a choice here, if you really want to think
Yep.
about it.
Yep.
I don't think that there's anyone out here that really believes that a mini primary would work. I was for it. And yeah,
The
you can
logistics are just hard, right? Like, I think
super
I think
hard.
it
I
would have
don't know.
been better, but it was the end of July. It's like
Right.
it's a
Right.
really mini
I,
primary.
I think
Like,
that most people in this business believe that if Joe Biden in mid to late 2023 would have announced not running for reelection, I don't know many people who believed at that time that Kamala Harris would have won a primary.
I
Right?
totally agree.
That it would have been a Gretchen Whitmer. It might have
Yep.
been Josh Shapiro. Maybe it would have been someone like a Roy Cooper. Or maybe it would have been just someone that we can't even think about right
But
now.
it would not likely a real primary likely we think of
Right.
it. I always think she probably would not have won.
Because of her standing at that time, not because
Correct.
I don't think she's a great person and she whatever. But I think that's my kind of analysis of it. But I do think that it goes deeper, and what people don't really think about about where and why the Democrats are struggling right now. They want to call it an identity crisis. I actually think it's schizophrenia. We have so many voices in the heads of the Democratic Party because we are a big tent.
Yeah.
That they are just they're beating each other up, and we're chasing the noise rather than having what I believe should be the priority for the Democratic Party right now every day is that our standing is so low, like 38% favorable. We're not even credible as critics. You can't be credible as critics if you're at 38% favorable. Elon Musk has a better favorable than the Democratic Party. That hurts. But that puts things in perspective, and you shouldn't be chasing after the noise. What you should be doing every day is trying to gain trust with working families, working people, that you have an economic message and you have an economic plan. And we don't do that every day and we're chasing the noise of USAID, or we're chasing the noise of birthright citizenship. Not saying that those things are important. We're chasing the noise of whether or not there was due process of sending some criminal illegals to El Salvador, instead of talking every day about here's our economic plan, about making your life better and giving you opportunity to succeed in the future. And they are giving us so many opportunities because 56% of America doesn't believe that Trump is making economics a priority. And
Correct.
so he has tariffs which hurt people. He's potentially going after Medicaid, Social Security, et cetera. We could go on and on the economic opportunities to make that contrast. Can I just say one other thing?
Of course.
Which I don't think people think about, again, how far, like, people want to believe that our demise was Kamala Harris. Absolutely unfair. We won in 2018 because of a reaction to Donald Trump's first 2 years in the presidency.
Yep.
We won in 2020 because Donald Trump screwed up.
Yeah,
COVID.
he botched a massive pandemic.
And we won in a midterm for the first time since like 1986, getting undecided voters, because the Republicans nominated so many extreme Senate candidates on abortion, and Roe was decided there. My point being is Democrats weren't winning. We were like,
they were not
Republicans
losing.
were losing.
Yes.
Republicans in 18, 20, and 22 were losing. We weren't winning because of what we were doing. And I think it all came home to roost in 2024. It really did. Yeah. And, should Joe Biden, early on decided not to run? Yes, I think we all agree on that. But the fact is that we are starting as a party kind of from scratch. And we're also, again, it's kind of schizophrenia. There's so many voices in our heads, and the ones that are getting through are the least mainstream. Almost a majority of self-identified Democrats right now want the party to be more moderate. And when you and I were kind of growing up in this business, I always like to give this example, is that when I was younger, even not that much far ago, but think about 2006 when Rahm Emanuel was head of the DCCC.
Yep.
Emanuel, right?
Yep.
And he's trying to get Nancy Pelosi the gavel. Well, think about how she got the gavel. She won that because there was people like, these are Southerners, Charlie Melanson, Travis Childers,
Louisiana, Mississippi,
Heath Schuler, and even John Salazar, the Western Front, moderate guy from Colorado. Do you remember Debbie Halverson, who was from Will County, very moderate from Illinois? Ron Klein, my client from Broward County, at that time had beat an incumbent. So she won with all these this mosaic of ideologies. And I always say, Rahm Emanuel could give two shits about what Charlie Melancon's positions were.
Can you
that's
win?
What was going to get him elected in Napoleonville, Louisiana. And I feel that right now we give Democrats no space, that everything has to be purity. And that there's these liberals who, again, God love them. I mean, I think they're important, but don't want to believe. They want to believe that their politics should be the politics of someone running in North Carolina, right? Or Colorado or wherever. And we give no space, and we're not allowed to have any conversation about the controversial issues.
I always think, I've probably said this to you before, or maybe you told me this and I just repeat it as my own. But I always think Democrats are better at winning the moral high ground than they are at winning elections. Do you know what I mean? Like, they like to feel as though, like, my view is like let's just take one little issue. Biological boys, trans girls playing in girls' sports. Trump doesn't say a ton of things that are accurate, to be honest, particularly when it comes to polling, but he's basically right. It's like an 80-20 issue, right? It's just, and I was stunned. So Seth Moulton, who is a Democrat from Massachusetts, he's not exactly like a wacko conservative. No. He comes out and says, like, look, I have two girls. Like, I'd rather not, like, a biological male be playing with them, which is a position that is broadly held in this country. And the chairman of the party says, well, he should resign.
It's mind-boggling. My point would be to the party elite, members of Congress, whatever, who just beat the hell out of Moulton or whoever, is like, we have to get to the point where we can have a conversation. that there shouldn't be an immediate purity test.
Yes.
Because, like, again, you go back to Clinton and all that type of stuff. Like, for example, things like gay marriage. There was a trajectory, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm not saying that we ever get to wherever, but my point would be is like, you want someone like Seth Moulton or John Anzalone. I consider myself pro-trans, right? But if I have a position or a belief differ on any issue, then I'm not pro-trans, and that's just not the case.
Or if
right?
you just want to say like, hey, look, I mean, this is what I always say to people. Look, I grew up in a Catholic family. I didn't know anyone who was trans. Maybe I did, but I didn't know anyone who was out. It's still weird for me. Weird, not bad, but like it is hard for me when an individual says I want to be referred to as they them. I'm not saying it's not okay. I'm just saying I struggle with that, and it's your purity test thing, I think, right? It's if you can't say, look, I understand not everyone shares my exact view, but that does not mean we can't work together.
I think most Americans, Wendy and I are a parent of 4 kids. We raised our kids in Montgomery, Alabama, so a really conservative place. There was a trans girl there. I'm sorry, trans man there at the time, boy, whatever, teenager. And at the end of the day, as a parent, regardless of your ideology, you just want to make sure that kid is safe.
Of course.
And you want to make sure that there's sensitivity to certain needs and what that kid is going through. And to us, that was the most important.
Of course.
And, does that make me pro-trans? Yeah, I mean, I think so. And I want there to be security, protection, and rights for trans. But my point is that I want to be able to have the conversation about the things that are getting people tossed out for being pro-trans. If it's, trans women playing in Division I sports, et cetera, et cetera. We should have the conversation. And we should give space to those Democratic candidates who are running in places that aren't Manhattan or aren't wherever. And again, we're talking about trans. There's a bunch of other issues.
Of course.
Right.
The thing that I come back to, I was thinking of when you were talking is like, I've always said this, like, look, Jasmine Crockett, who's sort of the liberal of the moment, she represents a district that Kamala Harris probably won by 55 points. That's totally fine. She fits that district. But to win in rural North Carolina, for example, Jasmine Crockett's message doesn't work. And so the question is, do you want to have purity or do you want to actually win and have power? Because political parties are supposed to be organized around winning. Here's
what I would say to my Democratic brethren and to the Crockett's of the world and AOCs, et cetera, who I am glad are in our party. But who I believe often chases the noise that damages our party instead of just talking about economic messaging, is the fact that, again, if they ever want to be in the majority, they need moderate elected. I mean, even in 2018, Pelosi for the second time, she was winning because of the, moderates, the Spanbergers type of, the Slotkins. Yes. Right? You win the gavel back by having, yes, a diverse caucus that has enough moderates, and it used to be conservatives. All those people I talked about were conservatives.
Very much so.
Conservative, right. To moderate. I mean, even think, one of my oldest clients, Mike Doyle from Pittsburgh, he was very much a moderate. Now he moved, I think, a lot more over the years as he rose up. But you have to have moderates to get the gavel back. And if our goal is to get the gavel back, then you damn well better want to make sure that our party is thought of as the party of working families and not the party that is thought of as weak and woke, which is now what you get in focus groups. What's the first word or phrase that comes to mind when you think of the Democratic Party? Weak and woke. And the Republican Party is now becoming the party of working families and is strong. And this is not Democrat related, but I always ask smart people in my life this because I've never understood it. How the hell, because it did happen, people can deny it, but it did happen. How the
hell did a Manhattan billionaire transform the Republican Party into the party where working class voters feel a home? What's your, like, when you think, because that to me is like the greatest
Yeah.
trick Donald Trump ever
Well,
pulled.
you
It's
know,
like he is the
sure.
least represented person of
Well,
the working class American.
I grew up working class. My dad was a long haul trucker. He was a Teamster. My mom was a switchboard operator.
Yep.
She finished high school. He didn't. All of my relatives, like, basically had blue collar jobs. And so I hear a lot of this, right? And again, I think the simplistic answer is that, one, I don't think we talk about authenticity enough in American politics. Like, he hit a time when, like, no one felt authentic, right?
Yep.
And I think the second thing I would say is that he was speaking the bubble in people's heads that they couldn't say. They couldn't say
Totally.
it with their family members. They couldn't say it at work. They couldn't say it, at the neighborhood outing, et cetera, or they would have gotten beaten up. And I think that there was just a swath of America who was so fucking tired of walking on eggshells.
I totally
And
agree.
he gave them a permission infrastructure to, well, one, that combined with social media, to start expressing all this stuff. And a lot of it, we all find distressing. But the fact is that he was hitting a nerve, because he was saying out loud the things that so many people wanted to say after, a decade of not being able to say it. And, like it or not, that was pretty important for him. It was important for people, to have
Yes.
someone like that. And then again, you combine that with the absolute transcendency of social media, and it's just a wildfire.
Yes. And I remember sitting in focus groups and people saying, and this is so true to your authenticity point, you would play something where Trump would say something like, you'd be like, what the fuck? Like something totally crazy, right? And people, you'd have, not me, I'm sitting behind the glass, but you'd have the moderator be like, what do you react to that? And time again, people would say, I mean, he's really authentic because no politician would ever say that. And you'd be like, oh my God, like it's like
Well,
the outlandishness of many of the things he said
yeah,
actually like helped to reinforce the idea that like this guy's an outsider, this guy's a real human. Like it's totally fascinating.
they also, voters, and I see this in focus groups, they, much better than us as opinion elites, have a much better radar, Trumpar, of knowing in their minds what's real and what's not. Oh, he doesn't
Okay.
mean that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, or oh, he's just saying that, but this is what he, like, they want to, whether it's justification or they really kind of know what's important for him and what's not. I mean, listen, voters clearly in 2024 were not bothered by, or a universe wasn't bothered by, Trump's abortion stance, because
Nope.
he said, I'm going to bring it back to the States. And in their minds, I think that he's from New York and he's a philanderer or whatever. They like, he never got tagged as being the right wing on abortion
Nope.
that the Senate candidates in 2022 did,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And they just have a certain way of kind of either rationalizing or really believing and understanding, what Trump is saying with the wink.
Totally. I think
I
you're
mean, I don't
totally
think,
right.
I don't think, why Greenland doesn't bother anyone,
Because
because
nobody gives
it's just kind of part of Trump's personality.
the Gulf of
He
America,
talks
right?
big.
Like,
Yeah.
um, okay, I want to do quickly because I want to focus. I will make the pitch for John. Not that I have to, but one of the things John is from Michigan, but has spent many of his adult years in the American South, mostly Alabama, and to me, that gives him a perspective that people who live on the coasts don't have, particularly in the Democratic Party, particularly at this moment. That's why I think he's so incredibly valuable, in addition to all the people he's gotten elected to Congress. So I want to focus on the future and sort of the economic message in the last 5 minutes. But let's do a few minutes on this. You have said and poll after poll shows, 27% favorability for Democrats, 29% for lowest ever, close to lowest ever. As you pointed out earlier when we were just talking, lower than Elon Musk in terms of favorability. Are Democrats broadly, whether that's Democratic elites, major donors, the consultant class, or the rank and file, I think that the brand problem is deep and very problematic to them. Even if 26 winds up being a good election, I think it probably will be. Do you, number one, agree on the brand front? And number two, are the people in your world aware of the situation? Because I feel like
Yeah.
some people are like, we almost won. He only won the popular vote by 1.5 million.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those are really slivers, right? I mean, I think everyone is aware of how bad we are. Like, I was one of Hillary Clinton's pollsters. I love Hillary Clinton. And when we lost, it was devastating. And when we lost to Donald Trump, it was devastating. And it took a long time to get over. But, when we were doing focus groups after that, people were kind of saying, lost because it was I couldn't vote for Hillary Clinton.
Yep.
Right?
It was not a Democratic problem. It was a
Man,
Hillary
those
problem.
groups right now are about Democrats.
Yeah.
Democrats listening, they've gone too far. They're not, I used to think, Chris, I remember, in the 90s, early 2000s, and, a lot of them were Southern Democrats whites who were Democratic elected officials, changed parties, and they would say, the party has left me. I always thought that was total bullshit. I thought they were being pragmatic. I understand it now. Like, I think that we should listen to people when they say the Democratic Party has left me. I mean, I love Sarah Longwell's. I think she has the best podcast out there. It's called Focus Group, right?
Yep.
I mean, she literally does focus groups. She has a guest, and they listen to focus groups, and they listen to real people.
Yes.
And the ones of Democrats are amazing. I mean, literally Democrats. And you should listen to the African Americans and the Latinos and the whites, right? And the young people. And they all have the same thing to say. And these are Democrats. And some of the, these are Biden to Trump voters. It's like they don't think that we're listening. They think that we've gone way too far to the left. They think we're completely woke. They think that we're weak. And so the branding problem is real. And it's much different than it was in 2017, where all we had to come up with was a moderate candidate who could beat Trump. And it happened.
Yes.
Who, quite frankly, put out a ton of plans. And, I was part of that campaign, right? Who felt safe. And we still lost we still won by only 45,000 votes in 3 states.
Yep.
Going back to my point that we aren't winning because of we're strong Democrats and we're making a connection with voters. And I think that our priority has to be building trust with voters. Like, again, we can't just be critics. And we can't just hope that we're going to keep defaulting to win because they do a worse job. I think that could happen in 2026 in the House. I think that, we should be, I think James Carville said it the best. I was talking to him the other day. He's like, it's like a second baseman. Sometimes you gotta wait for the ball to come to you, and you shouldn't have to chase, you shouldn't chase everything every day. And
it's so hard and they don't do a good job of it. No shade to Chuck Schumer, but him standing in front of, like, the fact that the first fight that Democrats picked, and let me say this, my wife's best friend worked for USAID. She did AIDS in Africa. She is one of the nicest, smartest people I know. I am not saying USAID doesn't do good work, but if the first fight Democrats are going to pick is an agency no one's ever heard of, that if you learn about it, gives billions of money to foreign countries, that's a terrible political fight to pick.
But it's not. It's also a bad visual. We had members of Congress and Senate marching to USAID headquarters. Whose idea was that?
Stupid.
I mean,
beyond stupid.
That day, they should have stood up like every other day and said, "This is our economic plan to make American working class prosperous." Every day.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about where you go, right? Because I think we are in broad agreement where you are, which is nowhere good at the moment. Where do you go? How do you? I think one of the problems, you said schizophrenia. I always say vacuum, right? Like, there's just it's the who's the lead. If you did a poll tomorrow and said who's the leader of the Democratic Party, my guess is that Harris would probably win because most people know her name. She'd be first, but
It
but
doesn't mean
it's not really her. It's not Biden. It's not Obama. It's not Clinton. It's not Schumer. It's not Jeffries. It's not really AOC or Bernie Sanders yet. So, like, how do you begin to form what you're talking about, which is a vision, right? I mean, like a vision of this is what you think of the Democratic Party is wrong. Here is what we believe. How do you do that without? Go ahead.
Yeah. No, there's a ton of autopsies going on right now. Ton of research projects that everyone, et cetera, et cetera. Like all that's going on, and that will get you nowhere. I mean, it's important work. No, don't get me wrong. It's important work, but I mean, the fact is that getting back in power. And so, like, if you take a look at the landscape, we're so close in the House. I'd be putting like literally every dollar into the House. Like, you got to
Yes.
save Ossoff, and you got to do what you can. If
In Michigan,
North Carolina, right,
yep.
Michigan. But again, the path there to win. So, I think we should be spending so much money on the House, and which we don't do. I can't understand it. So much money on state legislatures.
God, the Republicans do that so much better and have for decades.
Arizona, like, we have to own redistricting, right? Because it means so much. I mean,
it's a decade.
And so one, I think we got to like really spend our money wisely. And I don't think that we do that very often, but you get one chamber back, you get a power base, and you will shift kind of like what you can do and how you can do it. And again, between now and then, I just every day, I wish our leaders would go out there. I want to see literally the Democrats' economic plan for middle-class prosperity. Like, I want to see that, and I want to see it pounded every day. I want to see press conferences. I want to see town halls. I want to see advertising. I want to see them on the well of the floor talking about it. And every time, you have something like the issue of, the group chat on Signal, fine, let that play out in the press. They're hanging themselves. Or if we're, sending, what is it, Venezuelan?
Yes, Venezuelan gang, alleged Venezuelan gang members.
Let it go. You know what? The courts are our friends. We can deal with all that in the courts. Unfortunately, our hands are tied on all this other stuff. Where our hands are not tied is laying out how we're going to help working class people, seniors, and small businesses every day, every day, every day.
Is there someone, and I don't want you to pick favorites, so I'm not going to say someone, but is there someone? I mean, I always think it's easier to say, I think this person is doing it well, or I think this is a guidepost. Like, is there somebody out there in the party who you think, whether they're a client or not?
Well, like, and if they're a client, so people will say, oh, it's just, no, I think Gretchen Whitmer does things well every day because she focuses on her job as governor. And she's always had to focus on bipartisanship because the first 2 years of her tenure, she had a Republican legislature, and now she has one chamber, or is it both? But she every day, all she cares about is being governor and getting things done. Jennifer Palmieri did a wonderful piece on her, and I think Vanity Fair, that said Gretchen Whitmer's ideology is getting shit done.
Yep.
And she's been very clear about working with the Trump administration and getting things done, and she's going to get things done, right? I also think that there's politicians of my past that, you want, like Bill Clinton clearly was a populist that was important.
Yep.
I mean, again, we tend to knock down people who've lost, who've run good campaigns. Tim Ryan was ahead in the Ohio U.S. Senate race where J.D. Vance won. He got no help from D.C.
None.
Zero.
No money.
And J.D. Vance only won that because they came in late with $60 million. But he is a populist that understands moderates and economic populism. We forget Terry McAuliffe, who is maybe one of the best politicians I've ever experienced. And again, he lost because the Biden, Biden was going downhill in 2021, inflation, all that type of stuff. Rahm Emanuel, a winner every day, a winner, understands voters, cuts through on messaging incredibly well. So again, I mean, I'm not saying these are all people running for president, but
I know what you mean.
those type of people in their mold where their ideology is populism and getting things done and bipartisanship. And we don't want to talk about bipartisanship anymore. But the fact is that Americans want and moderation. Meaning,
you know what's so interesting? I forget who told me this, but I thought it was really smart. They said, just because you, Democratic base voter, hate Donald Trump, the average swing voter either doesn't think that much about their personal feelings or they just don't hate him. So it's like you can't build. To me, I wrote this thing about Trump derangement syndrome because when I worked at CNN, everyone was like, "Oh, Trump derangement syndrome. You just hate him and you can't." And I was always like, "It's so annoying. It's just bullshit. Like whatever." But I actually think it's not Trump derangement syndrome, but I do think there is like a blind spot that exists within some element, not insignificant element of the Democratic Party, where they hate Trump so much and they think he is such a shitbag and such a bad human that they're incapable, it blinds so much of their ability to see things.
If Democrats would just understand what real voters are telling them right now, just they like Trump's action, they like that he's getting things done. Action, action, action. And they put it in contrast with their perception that the lights weren't even on in the White House at the end. So they like his action. They like the mission of Doge, right? And they basically like the strength that he again perceived that he's brought America back, if you will, in terms of not being pushed around. So understand that, but also understand that people are really anxious about his tariffs. They really are worried about them, and they know that it's going to increase prices. They're really worried about any conversation about Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. So if you know that, use that. Those are economic issues. Use the vulnerabilities that he has. Again, the 56% who don't believe he's making economics a priority or inflation a priority, and stay in that lane. Not that you're not giving up principles by not going out there about all this other noise, right? Again, the courts are our friends, hopefully, and even if the courts aren't our friends, we can't do anything about it.
I was going to say, can't change it.
Can't change it.
Yeah.
So, if you want, again, every day, the sticky note should be get the gavel back. Every morning on the mirror. If you're an elected official, it should be get the gavel back. We want the speakership and we want the Senate presidency in the Senate. It's get the gavel back.
It's so interesting because I think that I want to end on this, which is there is opportunity here for Democrats if they could seize it. I keep coming back to the fact that you point the 56% number. Look, Trump's numbers on trust in handling the economy are lower today than at any point during his first term. Even though his numbers were pretty shitty during his first term overall, his overall job proof numbers, his numbers on the economy, I think because people were like, well, he's a businessman, he's like doing stuff, were actually good given where his numbers were elsewhere. His numbers are worse on trust in handling the economy today than they were I'm just going to say it again, than at any point in his first 4 years.
Yeah.
But, and this is what I don't know how you square the circle. You said earlier, we're not even credible as critics right now. How do you square yes, opportunity does exist. He's doing things, tariffs, etc., that are creating uncertainty, stock market. But you guys are in a place where everybody thinks you're weak and woke. How do you take advantage of that opportunity?
Well, again, I think where you'll take advantage of it is when the $5 to $7 billion will be spent on campaigns in 2026.
Yeah.
Then but you better start formulating your economic message now and your economic contrast.
And what should the message be, John, in a sentence? Because I know you're a political guy.
No. But here's my point: is that take my economic messages, have an economic message, have an proposal, and put the proof points underneath.
Right.
It's like this is not all that difficult. Like, right. I was looking at again Gretchen Whitmer. She just did a bunch of stuff on skill training, and there's a ridiculous number of electricians needed nationwide, hundreds of thousands. I think we're doing all these data centers and things like that, building all these manufacturing. You need 100,000 electricians or more. Someone look it up. That's all about skills training at community college and getting your certificate, et cetera, et cetera. Like, there's a million things we can be talking about. There are literally a million jobs out there for middle class Americans that if all they do is go get their certification, they can make $80,000 or $100,000 a year.
Yep.
Why aren't we concentrating on that? Right? I mean, like, there's so many things that we can be doing like that. How many nurse practitioners do you need, or nurses, et cetera, et cetera? So I think that right now, Rahm Emanuel brilliantly, I believe, is the only one talking about education. That, like, over 50% of eighth graders can't read at eighth grade schools or something like that.
Yep.
Our healthcare system is broken. Our education system broken. Our criminal justice system is broken. It's like, there's plenty to talk about that all ties in to a person's economic well-being, and we should be talking about those important issues.
And not getting sucked into the Panama Canal takeover.
Right. Or whether or not, these supposed criminals got sent to El Salvador. That just shouldn't be,
because there's just nothing you can do, right?
Yeah. It's going to all be taken care of court. And more importantly, that is not the priority for real people. This signal thing is not a priority for real people. Let it play itself out,
Right.
Let it play itself out. But at the end of the day, they're so good at the end result, Hootie's getting blown up, or the end result, Venezuelan gang members being sent away.
Yes,
the end
they are.
result is good, And if we're going to debate whether there was some of them who weren't criminals, then we're losing.
Well, you're just losing. You're totally fighting on his turf. If he has gotten you to be like, number one, making a legal argument, which people don't understand, right? And then number two, being like, well, not all of these people were Venezuelan murderers. You're just losing.
There was I don't even know which congresswoman. It was a congresswoman from New Mexico, so we probably can figure it out. Was on the well, Democrat, who was just doing this outrage kind of like stand. I loved it because they were debating some ridiculous issue, refrigerants or reform or something like that, and not talking about economics. And I'm like, yes, that's what we should be doing every day. What are you doing about bringing costs lower? What are you doing about getting this trade war under control so we can have certainty? What are we doing about not touching? There's so much we can be doing.
And the answer to every question, right? Like, what do you make of Trump saying he's going to take over Greenland? Well, I'm more focused on what he's not doing for middle class families, right? Like, just every time.
Every time.
All right, I'm going to let you go.
Great.
45 minutes. You are
Good
the best. Thank you, my friend. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. You can watch it afterward. This is Out of the Wilderness. That's John Anzalone.
All right.
One of, if not the smartest man in American politics.
Good to see you.
Take care, dude. Bye.